And welcome to Inspiring Honesty. I'm your host, Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist. Joined again today with the unconventional pastor, Bob Graves, my amazing co-host. And I first wanted to open up in saying that I have had a wonderful weekend. Yesterday was the national convention for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, of which I am a member, and I enjoyed the convention immensely. The Freedom from Religion Foundation is a organization based out of Madison, Wisconsin. They try to do their convention there every other year, but it was 2 years in between in this situation. So I attended the last one they had in Madison as well, and that was actually the first convention that I went to very shortly after coming out of the closet as an atheist on Facebook. So it was significant to me in many ways. One, just to recognize how much my life has changed, and I've I guess grown and developed in that time, and realizing that it's been 3 years, and I went from being the kid who was just sort of coming to terms with his own life situation to having a great time there yesterday, and mingling with people and meeting some of the other fellow podcasters and bloggers that are out there, and that I've interact with on Facebook on a regular basis. Had a great conversation with Phil Ferguson from the Pink Atheist podcast and Skeptic Money blog. We talked for over an hour while there was a movie playing that we've both seen. So that was phenomenal. And then I had a dinner with Justin Schreiber and Justin Vacula. Interestingly enough, Justin Schreiber is one of the contributors to the Reasonable Doubts podcast and blog, and they have many different ways in which that comes about. And they, when I say interestingly enough, the reason that I became familiar with Reasonable Doubts is because when I created my Facebook page and my blog, as it was originally, Inspiring Doubt, I was upset that they existed because I wanted that name. But some people got there first. And so I met him and had some great conversation, awesome dinner, listened to some of his podcasts again today, and specifically the ones tackling presuppositionalism, because I always sort of enjoy seeing how other people have tackled that. I recommend it, by the way, anybody who wants to. The first half hour of the show, they basically talk about the news and things of the time. But if you find the one, part one of presuppositionalism, they go into the argument. And actually, I thought it was great because what they did is approached it instead of in a straw man fashion, in what would better be described as a steel man. They described their argument in the most positive light it can be described, and really gave it a great description, depth, and breadth, even its historical origins and why it can be a challenge to overcome. And then Justin Vacula, on his website, I believe is just justinvacula.com. It was interesting, though, to be a part of that, coming from the skeptic and atheist community here, because anybody who's familiar with Reasonable Doubts knows that they are hosted by free thought blogs, the same people that host PZ Myers and many other people that are associated with Atheism Plus, which is a social movement involved with feminism and many other positive social aspects. And then Justin Vacula is a very divisive character within that same community, and is, vilified by many others on free thought blogs, especially, just searching his name brings up a laundry list of different people sort of defaming him. And yet, here I was sitting there having a very, very nice, pleasant conversation with a blogger from Free Thought Blogs and with Justin Vacula, who should have, by all rights, hated each other. It was like when I had dinner with Eric Hovind, and once again, it just reaffirmed to me the importance of what we do with the New Covenant Group in trying to find the things that people have in common and the even ground, as well as giving people a venue to discuss and debate the things that they're passionate about without that becoming personal and having or creating personal barriers for communication and friendship. It was just a wonderful demonstration of how even people who have are in separate camps within this community could still come together and have a very nice, pleasant conversation, dinner, and day. I mean, they spent most of the day hanging out with each other, and it reaffirmed my belief that it's not just people who are united in our atheism that can do that, but people who are united in our common humanity that can all come together and do that in the future. So that's what the New Covenant Group is here for, and I love being a part of the New Covenant Group, and I love having the opportunity to do all of this, to participate with the Cult of Honesty, to do Clash Course, and frustratingly try to kick through the goalposts that Joey keeps moving around, and then have these conversations with Bob, who is just too damn reasonable for me to not like. So with that, Bob, I'm excited for this show and for every show that I do with you, as always. And I appreciate you being here, appreciate you being part of the New Covenant Group and of Inspiring Honesty and the Cult of Honesty and all the other things that you do with us. And today, I want to tell you why you shouldn't believe some of the stuff you do.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll tell you what, the feeling is definitely mutual. We've been doing this together now for a little over a year, and I've had a ball doing it. I've enjoyed the discussions, but I've really enjoyed getting to know you. And I can say this, although I definitely am theistic in my thinking, I can't imagine how my theism in any manner infringes upon or impedes upon our relationship as friends and what we're doing. And I really think that if anything, it's helped make both of us. It's made me a better theist and made you a better atheist. Because it's so easy for us to misrepresent notions we don't embrace. And what we're doing makes it difficult to do that, while at the same time recognizing some of the homework we may need to do for our own way of thinking, which just only improves the way we're dealing with it. Yeah.
That's something that we discussed yesterday at dinner, because I had this table full of very outspoken atheists, and I felt the need to, of course, bring up what we do with the New Covenant Group and why I think that's important, and why, I'm wary sometimes of even groups like the Freedom from Religion Foundation, because there were people there. Specifically, let's see, hold on, I have his card here.
I like it, though. I got to be honest with you. I like it. I do.
You like the Freedom from Religion Foundation?
Well, I mean, I like the different flavors. I think that we need the people who are in dialogue to show that we can get along. But also, I think that there's some real anger out there that is justified anger, disappointment, and some feelings out there that need to be expressed, and they're harder to express when we have to be nice, And so I think it's very good for people who are believers to, read people who are a little bit more on the belligerent side, like, Richard Dawkins. I think it's important. We need to know that this is the impact some of the history of these traditions have on people, and we need to take them seriously. And of course, if they didn't have the freedom to, just let it all out passionately, we could just more easily sweep that stuff under the rug, And I think it's also one of the reasons why I sometimes I'll even listen to believers that I certainly can't agree with, as they get involved in trying to at least appreciate where they're coming from, and so I think it's helpful to have all of those different angles working simultaneously.
I think you're right that it does help to I guess divide labor and help I guess have different flavors, as you put it. I think that was a great terminology to attract people in different ways. Of course, not everybody understands things in exactly the same way, and if we try to force everything into the exact same mold, you're just going to alienate the vast majority of people. But I think that the primary thing that's lacking is cohesion. That's why I love things like the Center for Inquiry, because the
Mhm.
or the Secular Coalition of America actually is another big one that I'm a huge fan of, because the Secular Coalition for America is a place where Freedom from Religion Foundation and Americans United, which are of common goal in creating and fighting for a secular government, but one of them is an organization for and by atheists. The other one is an organization for and by Christians. As far as I'm aware, there's not one for other general
Mm.
theists. I think most of them fall into the Americans United umbrella, or would draw towards that. But the Secular Coalition of America brings them together under
Right.
a common united goal, and I think that that's more of what we need, and more of what I'd like the New Covenant group to eventually become, a way in which we can network all of these different things and find our way, because I think that we do all fight for a common goal, and that is improving the human condition. And
And there's a lot of both theists and atheists who don't understand the meaning of the word secular. Uh, uh, it doesn't mean trying to get people to necessarily totally abandon their particular beliefs about God. It just means that, insofar as we are each voices in a community, the community is operated as a community using the voices of people, as people, bearing only the political power that they possess and having the kind of social contract we have with our government to accomplish the joint ventures that we must through the way we have decided or chosen to rule ourselves. And as a result, we don't have a theocracy. The secularism of our culture is not. It's where the decisions we're making. You're free to have whatever reasons the things that make sense to you make sense to you. But when it comes to argue them, you're going to have to do it based on the things we hold in common.
right, and I think a lot of people view secularism. I mean, I understand it to mean basically a lack of excuse me, a lack of direct religious influence in government. But that
Right.
doesn't mean, and plenty of religious people will certainly make this point as well. It doesn't mean that governing officials are and our government in general is not informed by our values. As a matter of fact, that would be absurd. It has to be informed by our
Yeah.
values, and our values are informed by many different things: our human experiences, our religion, our family upbringing, our ethnic heritage, the general culture, all play a part in our values and the things that
Right.
we find important. And we can't govern without finding common values and
No.
assessing some. I think that the point of secularism is to, in a way, limit which values can necessarily be universalized, or trying to find the values that can be more universalized.
Well, also
Because if
it
there's one
it,
that
it might.
comes only from religion, then it really can't.
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think any of. Well, when people are trying to sell you something, the best way to a good way of selling you something is to try to demonstrate how what they're trying to sell you is precisely that which meets your need. You know, and so when people are trying to sell religion, as it were, they want to attribute to that religion as much as they can that they need to sell you. But I got to be honest with you, I don't think that morals or values come from our religion. I think they come from our human experience. And those of us who are people of faith, we simply attribute this in a indirect way as having been sourced in the nature of our creation and our existence. But I think that if we're going to have to be honest, it's really these are still based on our worldview, the way we look at the world, the way we look at our experience, and the values that we have thereby acquired. We all acquire these values the exact same way. And so, and that's
I'd have to I have to agree and disagree to some extent. That I think that's it's true for how we do come about many of the values, but some of the values that people do come about are influenced in odd ways, and that's where I think it becomes the religious side of it,
Well, for
because of
example,
the things like anybody who would take divine command theory to be a value, that following the word of God as it written in this book as a primary value is something that they may have come about that value in the same manner that other people come about their own values, but that value becomes something that cannot be considered a
do you
secular.
think we're being do you think we're being hoodwinked? Do you think they're being hoodwinked? I would wonder, that kind of a value strikes me as being I can't figure life out. And rather than admit that I'm just going to be irresponsible, I'm going to imagine that I'm receiving these commands from God, and therefore I don't have to go through all the hard work of deciding whether or not there's a cost benefit analysis going on here. And I got to be honest with you, I think that those kind of people are really just throwing up their hands and coming up with a shortcut that they think you can't talk them out of. I I I really think it comes from something other than their sense of having some sort of command from God. I think that's a story. I'm at least I'm suspicious of it highly.
And I can grant you that that's possible.
Yeah.
I'm going to abstain from speculating on that because I think there's enough of that in the atheist community already. I'll leave that to the
Yeah.
theists to make such speculations.
Well, then let me make a confession. There was a time when I was a fundamentalist. And when I was a fundamentalist, it was very appropriate for me to believe that God had a personal will for my life. In fact, if I was going to do something, if I was going to announce plans, if I wanted other Christians to support me, I had to somehow come up with an argument as to why I know this is God's will for my life. If I'm going to marry this person, I've got to somehow, in the process of involving myself in this romance, also persuade this other person that we've been praying about it and God has led us and this is his will for us. We're going to buy this house. We're going to search for this job. All of these things had to be explained in terms of God's will. Well, while you're doing that, you're not necessarily being insincere, but you're looking at ways of basically reading the tea leaves of circumstances to try to discern how God might be, sending you the inferences that you need to be making. And by the time I came to the end of that, I realized I'm kidding myself. I'm playing a game, and the main reason I was playing that game is because I didn't want to be caught with my spiritual pants down. I didn't want to be the Christian that says, well, God isn't leading me to do anything. I'm asking him what to do, where to go to school, who to marry, what job to do, and I'm getting nothing. I couldn't admit to that. So I had to learn to play the game. And I tried to play the game sincerely. It's kind of like act it, like fake it until you make it kind of thing. But to be honest with you, that confession is my way of saying that back when I was even trying to believe that, I knew it wasn't working.
Well, and that's again, I think it's a valuable experience for you to share, but I'm hesitant to make that sort of a
No,
universal
yeah,
assertion. It feels a little bit too much like telling people that they know that God exists in their heart and they're denying it. It's I don't know enough about people's personal experiences to make that.
yeah.
I can say that I did experience something similar. In me, it was never quite so fundamentalist. It developed into more of a deism, and when I realized that it was me just trying to force
Right.
myself into that was when it sort of all fell apart for me as well. But I guess the point that I was making was that if, regardless of why a person justifies this as their value, if a person does value conformity to a set of rules that they a deontological um, position or moral code that is not already part. It's I don't know. It's difficult to even say because like somebody who values following the law because it is following the law would be. a legalist, but a legalist would not have any rational justification for challenging a law then, and saying that it's an unjust or immoral law. And the same would be true for anybody who values the Bible, the Quran, or any other moral or codified moral framework, or even just behavioral framework.
At least those that value it authoritatively. Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean by secularism. Is values like that cannot be. That is what secularism means. Values of that nature cannot be considered. That's what secularism means, in my mind, is limitation of the kinds of values that can be considered.
And many can. And many can. I'm not. I don't buy into that argument that some theists want to make, that if you're an atheist, you have no foundation of values. That's so crazy. It's you can't make that argument unless you really don't happen to know an atheist. I've known you now for a little over a year, and I can't picture anybody saying that you are a person who has no sense of right, wrong, value, or whatever. That's just absurd. And I think,
well, the fact that you're limited in your creativity doesn't mean it's not an accurate assessment of me. I arbitrarily choose my values every morning when I wake up.
That's
I have a hat. That's where I'm from. It works for me because I don't have a universal source of truth. Yeah. So right. It works. And hey, it's just as arbitrary as anything else, right? I mean, I don't base it on empathy or compassion or anything like that, because that would be far too reasonable.
Right.
But
or the recognition of our nature and who, and the truth. Think about it. The reason why some things are understood by people without regard to their view of God as wrong is rooted in their understanding of how the outcome of that kind of behavior affects who and what we are based on our nature. I mean, for example, if we were people who we had these unusual bodies where projectiles just went through them and tickled us, then it couldn't possibly be entirely immoral to shoot somebody with a gun. So it's not really necessarily even the behavior itself that is wrong, but the fact that behavior has outcomes for us that create certain things, and based on our nature. So to me, I can't even picture values or morality being based on anything other than the empathy of our nature and recognizing the truth about the outcomes of choices.
And that, I think, is extremely valid. And I'm actually going to, if you'll be part of the Cult of Honesty on this coming Wednesday, I'm really hoping that you can bring that up again, because it's a very valuable point, specifically when we're talking about the subject for that coming show will be modesty, gender relations, and a few other things. And I love the point that behavior is not necessarily good or bad. Similar to wearing a particular shirt is not good or bad. It is dependent upon the context and so.
Although, you know what? I would even say that we were talking about love before. Although love is expressed and oftentimes manifested in behavior, I don't believe behavior has anything. Is that connected? Love is more connected to the motive, the intent, and our conscious recognition of the outcome likely to be produced by that behavior. And the behavior is merely a bridge between our motives and our understanding of outcomes. And the behavior that we choose to achieve those outcomes is chosen for that reason.
So I wanted to take. I agree. By the way, sorry, I didn't want to ignore that point, but I wanted to go back to something that we were talking about a bit last week, which is a shift in subject. It's related though, because we were talking about suffering and love and things in that context. But to recap last week, we were talking about the idea of a loving God ignoring prayer. That was heard, and even prayers for intervention in the most horrible of circumstances. And that led then to a discussion about what happens at death, and the potential for an afterlife. And one subject that is related to that, I have got to tell you, I've been chewing on your comment about the interface being destroyed. That's been a one that I've been, I guess, sort of
you're talking about
circling around the
the
drain of.
notion, yeah, the notion that our body presents to our sentient self a constraint of filters upon which our experiences are bound, and that so long as we're alive and in this body, we are subject to its constraints. But there is an us that is something other than just what is constrained by it, that survives the body's demise.
Right, and that dualistic understanding of the mind body split is what I guess I wanted to return back to, and last week we discussed a few different evidences or reasons why I don't believe that there is a split. And admittedly, if we're going to offer in, or I guess not take any firm position and say what is potentially possible, then I certainly can grant your position. It's one that
I admit
can't
it's
say
an
it's
extremely
impossible
weak
for
one.
that.
I admit it's an extremely weak one.
But I wanted to talk about some of the reasons that people do give for believing things in that nature, that there is something beyond life, or there is a way that our mind can exist outside of our body. Things like near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. And you have had a near-death experience. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
I can. But before I do, I should preface it with this. I'm often very hesitant to talk about it, and the main reason I'm hesitant to talk about it is because I find that many times the reaction that it gets is a reaction I consider to be so irrelevant to the impact it had on me that it's almost like if I wanted to share with you a moment I had that was extremely meaningful, and as I'm sharing it with you, it means something so entirely different to you that I never get a chance to tell you what it meant to me, and so it's like that.
Well, then,
I find
in that context,
yeah.
I'm going to say you don't necessarily, and I understand, I think, where you're going with that, and saying that
Yeah.
when you're sharing this, you're not sharing it as an argument that there is an
No.
afterlife, right? You're just sharing your
No.
personal experience. Is that
It
correct?
it was an experience that I authentically had. What does that experience mean? How the hell would I know? I wouldn't know that. I had this experience. It was my experience. I can't pretend it wasn't my experience. But just because it was my experience does not make me a person who can speak definitively or authoritatively as to exactly what it really was. It could have been a hallucination. I don't know, and so I really have nothing invested in it. But I certainly came away from it a person who was headed in a radically different direction, with a different set of priorities, a different seed within me of values that were about ready to emerge, even though they didn't emerge immediately. But I went from a person who was intensely self-loathing, very faithful Christian, believing in my sinful nature and the fact that I must be just in my mere existence such a stench to God, and how good it is of Him to love me anyway, in spite of how horribly unacceptable I was, to coming out of that, finding that disliking myself for who and what it is I am was impossible to do. I just couldn't do it. It just didn't make sense to me anymore. You couldn't do it. It's kind of like if you, like a person who might have a lot of bias and prejudice against maybe a particular type of people or a certain ethnic group, and then has this experience where he meets somebody from that ethnic group and has an extremely meaningful and life-changing experience, and they can never perceive that group or those people anymore as being the inferior people. You just can't do it, and and so that was definitely for me a powerful outcome of it. But well, you want me to tell you a little bit more about the experience itself?
If you'd like to share it, that's I
Um,
think it's what you've shared
I
already is very
yeah,
relevant to the.
I was definitely very much a fundamentalist in terms of my beliefs, in terms of the way I was trying to develop my faithfulness as a person whose only desire was to be a minister of the gospel. And I was also a person who was very much troubled with a lot of aspects of my own self and character that I felt were manifestations of my utter sinfulness. And it made me hate myself, but it also made me feel like it was that which disqualified me from ever being a really good or effective minister. It made me feel like I was somehow rejected by God, and that all of these other preachers who are winning thousands and thousands of souls to Jesus, I just would never be one of these effective people because, you know, big loser, big. And that was just me, and I developed this hatred for myself. Well, this one night I'm sitting down reading, and a theoretical question, a hypothetical question comes to me. What if somehow something went wrong and Jesus is now in hell and he's not in heaven, and the only way we can fix this situation for this person who doesn't deserve to be there is if I was willing to turn things around in my life so that I, I no longer had these propensities or these behaviors or these things about me that I saw as being such unacceptable shortcomings. And I realized that I didn't know what I was doing, and I also knew that I couldn't change things about myself that I didn't like. And for some reason, this made me feel utterly wicked, utterly loathsome, in uh, that I would rather Jesus stay in hell forever than me change. And that was my honest situation, and it made me feel so totally unacceptable that I wanted to die. I just wanted to die. I begged to die, and I actually prayed. I begged God to just be done with me, to kill me, put me in hell. And it was a very intense moment for me, and I passed out. I was gone, and as I'm coming to, as it were, I'm just suspended in this blackness. There's no gravity. I'm not like hanging upside down or sideways. I'm just there, and in total blackness. And I hear a voice speaking to me, and it appeared to me in that experience to be a voice as from God, and it disgusted me to hear it. I just, the thought of putting myself in the presence of such a voice was so disgusting to me that I turned away from it. And then it spoke to me again. And make a long story short, along comes this bright light from a great distance and splashes me in the face like water. And make a long story short, this is more like a vision or hallucination. I ended up for close to 45 minutes having this ongoing conversation and experience, where the most dynamic thing about it that I remember was that there was nothing about who and what I am that was being hidden or that had to be hidden or not honest about, but it made absolutely no difference. I was deeply loved, deeply cherished, and was an existence that was in inexpressible pleasure to this voice around me to know, to have, and to be close to. And when this thing comes to an end, I leave this thing feeling that, well, I'm not a better person yet, and I still don't know what to do or how to handle my life or what I'm doing, but I couldn't hate myself. I saw that there was something deeper than my situation, deeper than my problems, that was a part of who I really am, that was actually far more valuable. And I came out of that not just seeing that about me, but recognizing that it made absolutely no sense to believe anything other than that high value was a high value that belongs to absolutely every single person. And that was just the impact that it had on me. And needless to say, it didn't change my theology right away. But as I would confront my theology, as I would preach on Sundays, and when I would do things like this, I would realize that the things I was saying were just not consistent with that moment and the impact that it had on me, that it forced me over time to radically abandon so much of the paradigm I was in. And I did, along comes a time, and next thing you know, I'm this unconventional pastor. And that also includes getting an education about what's going on inside of me, studying psychology, studying sociology, studying human development. I went back to college for this secular degree and everything. And I come away from it realizing that, so this was my experience, but I don't know what to make of it. But it certainly had a wonderful impact on me, and I don't mind that impact, and I'll take that. That I know, But sometimes I share that with people, and they go, "Oh, that's awesome! I wish I could have a vision like that." Maybe, I guess, but I'll tell you, when I tell you that I was self-loathing, I'm very suicidal. That's a dark place you don't want people to have to be. It was for me an extremely dark place. And, I grew up in a home where there was, in my opinion, a great deal of emotional abuse. There was never anything uplifting or upbuilding. And so, I entered into adult life feeling like a total piece of crap, and my experience only proved to me that that is exactly what I am. And in my desire to be a good person, a good Christian, my sense of distorted honesty couldn't ever come to any other conclusion but that, to the extreme degree. And then comes this experience, and I walk away from that headed in a totally new direction. There's a lot of other details I could share that it wasn't until later that I realized that many of the things, the sequence of events, was identical to the outworking that a lot of people talk about as they have a near-death experience.
And that's, I guess, the only question that I have remaining. I don't want to try to pick apart your experience or anything again, because I know you're not preferring it as an argument here, simply just describing what your experience was. But the only question that I have is, why do you consider that to be a near-death experience? When, I mean, at least from what you shared in the story, it didn't seem like there was any.
At first, I didn't. At first, I didn't think of it that way, but it was as I became aware of other near-death experiences and many of the other details that I haven't shared. It was identical with the experience of how this world seemed to disappear, the way the other world came about, the concepts of bright light, the different, and even the motions that were part of it. I can't tell you how many near-death experiences I started reading about. It was like exact same sequence of events, and or very similar sequence of events, and so I see it as and of course when we say near death, we don't know we don't know how near death is, but so it was certainly an experience of that same order, that same magnitude, and leaving me also with a very similar outcome.
So, I mean, I'm not going to, I guess, try to change your terminology for how you choose to, but would you say it's reasonable for me to understand it as sort of an out-of-body experience, or
Sure.
just a religious experience or a prophetic experience, perhaps?
Yeah, we can categorize it any way we like, and that's really just an analysis. To
Right.
me, the main thing about it was that it was an experience.
Right. Well, the only reason that I'm asking those questions is because then I was going to approach that in saying that your out of body experience or your prophetic experience is not something that you assert to be evidence of an afterlife, but other people do assert theirs to be, and yours doesn't seem to be quite a perfect analog to because it's not related to death in quite the same manner, and that other people do it when their hearts stop or were, you
Yeah.
know,
I have no idea what happened to me physically. I was certainly gone for a good 45 minutes. I was conscious of the time when I began begging to die, mainly because I was upset about the fact that I'd wasted so much time in my life. And then when it all came to an end, I looked at I wasn't sure what was going on, but I did look at a clock and I could see that 45 minutes had passed. So just what sort of state I was in, somnambulistic, hypnotic death, what I don't know, but it was certainly there was during that time no consciousness of any sort of what was going on in the material world that I normally seem to live in. You know, it's just an odd sort of thing.
So how do you feel about people that would use an argument like, or I guess not people that do, but how would you feel about the use of such an experience, or specifically a similar experience that is related to a physiological death, the stopping of a heart, the near drowning, things of that nature that are so often related as an argument for the mind body duality?
I don't think that it is an argument for it. I mean, they may try to use it that way, but I think they do so unaware of the various different things we know about brain chemistry, hallucinations, and things like that. And I'd also be a person who would have to argue that I don't believe there is any evidence for God, and I believe evidence for God is completely impossible. I'm convinced of that. And so, if there is anything that God would ever do that would manifest itself in our lives in any manner, it would have to be something that was created through what would appear to be normal means and would be indistinguishable from them. And there's just no argument for it. And that's not because I think he's tricky. I think it's because we live in 3 dimensions plus time, and we can't experience anything in this current constraint except in those terms. So I don't see it as an argument. I don't see it as a workable argument, because there's nothing that happened that can't have a perfectly natural explanation.
I once again I struggle in trying to make any sort of I told you that I'm going to explain to you why you're wrong, or why you shouldn't believe what you should or believe at the or why you shouldn't believe what you do believe at the beginning of the show, right? That's how I introduced you today. But it's so hard to specifically target anything towards you. But again, I wanted to nuance what I did at the beginning of last week's show when we talked about this, and saying that I think the power of our show is not in where we disagree, but in where we agree, and in where we can say, as a theist and an atheist, these things do not lead to the conclusions that people assert them to. It's not a impossible
If there's something
scenario.
If there's something on the other side of this life, it's on the other side of this life. And that's where it is. And that's where it will stay. So that I just don't see the possibility that there is something there beyond it is different from the evidence that there's something beyond it. Those are 2 completely different issues, and they shouldn't be confused with each other. As a result, I would consider it the kind of experience that to share as if I were trying to compel someone or give them good reasons to believe. I would see that as either absurd or taking advantage of and manipulating a person whose critical thinking skills aren't as sharp as they ought to be.
We have a viewer comment here that says, if there's no way to detect God, then how does he justify knowing there is a God? And I mean, I can answer that for you.
Oh,
if you'd like.
Go ahead.
He doesn't.
Go ahead.
He doesn't justify it. That's what makes it so damn frustrating. I tell you.
Well, let's say something else here, though. This for me is just a working theory. I'm not invested in it. It's just an idea I toy with. If I was to meet somebody who was truly deaf, and that is because for some weird reason they biologically even lack the apparatus for converting uh, variations of atmospheric pressure called sound into an audible experience. If they're that stone deaf, they might be able to see, they might be able to read, they might be able to do a wide variety of other things. But how could we, through the senses that remain in them, explain to them in a way they could understand what sound is? That would be an extremely difficult thing. We could come up with metaphors or analogies based on the other senses. We could even explain some things, perhaps, but those metaphors would always lack something because sound is sound, vision is vision, touch is touch, smell is smell,
Right.
and these things are
We're
different
limited by
windows.
our phenomenology in that respect. I mean,
Right,
you can't explain what red is to a blind person either.
right.
I
However, what uh, I certainly don't believe in the kind of a God who requires that anybody know that he exists. Uh, to me, that's too much of a tyrant. I can't see how that could ever. But I do think it's possible that some of us possess. We got a guy who lives in this area. His name is Phil Jordan. He doesn't live too far away from here, and for the last 30 years, this guy has been phenomenal. He's a psychic, and the police have used him to help him locate where bodies might be, and think, how does this guy do what he does? I haven't got any clue, but and I don't think he even claims to have a clue, but he does this. What is it he's doing? What is it he's in touch with? How does he do this? I mean, because he's not like reading cards from the backside or something. So something weird is going on there. Is it possible that there's some of us who, for whatever reason, have a sense of this presence? And consequently, we kind of invent theologies to try to explain to other people, and then we just get ourselves into trouble
Well,
because
that's the thing, though. I have to say that, and we're very short on time here, so I don't want to, I guess, delve into it. But maybe our topic for next week needs to be, and I guess the assertion that I'll make, or make an informative question: shouldn't people have good reasons to believe the things that they do believe? And that even let's to go so far as to say this Phil Jordan. The psychics. I mean, yes, there's plenty of people that claim to have a sixth sense, or what, an additional sense, however many senses you want to call the senses. But there's because we certainly actually have far more than five. We have a sense of a tactile, kinesthetic sense. Anyway, people claim to have this additional sense, this ability to sense the supernatural. And you're right, to a deaf person, it's impossible to describe a person who's truly deaf. Lacking the nerves or the apparatus to make sense of sound, that is impossible for us to describe that sound or what sound is like. They'll never understand the experience, but that doesn't mean that there's no way for us to demonstrate that sound exists, and that we can indeed hear sounds that they cannot, or that they cannot hear. Likewise,
are there
psychics
people who
have,
sense a presence that you don't?
I, are there people who sense a presence that I don't? There's certainly
Yeah,
people who claim to. And
yeah.
that's where things like this is where skepticism is so incredibly important. This is what I'll have to come back to next week. Is we have the Center for Inquiry. We have the James Randi Foundation is a great one because he has made a career of as a former illusionist and magician, debunking or demonstrating the fraudulent nature of most of these so-called
Yep.
psychics, mediums, or other. I hesitate to use the word because it is potentially possible that somebody does truly have this sense. They've just never stepped forward to prove it under any sort of experimental conditions for the $1 million that is now on the line for them to do that. So if you think you have it, by all means, take the challenge. It's a great way to either learn that you're misinterpreting something, or to win $1 million and prove to the world that you do have this other sense that we simply don't understand yet. And we don't understand how it works or why it works, and we'll never be able to relate to it not having it. But I have to say that before, I believe anyway, before people should hold beliefs about ontology, about things that exist and how things work, they should have good reasons to do so. And
Well, I think they do, but I'll tell you this, people don't need to have what you consider to be good reasons. They only need what they consider to be good reasons. And I think there's a big difference between what it is I'm comfortable believing myself and what it is I feel I have a right to compel upon someone else.
and that is a fair point. We're going to have to return to that next week. I'd love to discuss it further, but we are now over time. So thank you for joining us. This has been Inspiring Honesty. Stick around after this for the Unconventional Pastor with that guy, or that guy.
And with Dr. Shook.
Oh, Dr. Shook is going to be on your show today, huh? Excellent.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Then I look forward to that. And then, of course, the
Cool.
place to follow. And if you have the opportunity, join us this Wednesday. I'm really excited about the topic for the Cult of Honesty right after Bob's second weekly show, or first, depending on when you start your week. His other weekly show of the Unconventional Pastor, when we are going to be doing the Cult of Honesty hangout and discussing modesty and gender relations in modern American culture specifically, and how religion relates to that. So thank you for joining us. Tune in again next week. Stick around. Tune in Wednesday, and basically just watch us all the time because we're awesome, is what I'm ending on.
Yeah.